Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible comes together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Fletcher.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Jay.
And today's story is about Barnabas.
Why do you say it like that?
Barnabas. His real name's Joseph, apparently. I just found that out. I had no idea. Joseph and Barnabas means son of encouragement. So
yes.
They lied to you. It's not really Barnabas.
Oh.
Right? I guess they probably went with Barnabas. Well, yeah. I had a thought, and then I realized it actually doesn't matter.
Make any sense.
Or make any sense.
It wasn't going to be funny either.
It wasn't going to be funny. It wasn't going to add to the story. It wasn't going to be helpful. It possibly wasn't even going to be true.
Okay.
So we'll move on to the question.
Wait a second. Okay, I just made the best connection for who Barnabas can be in modern day. You ready for this? He's Barnacle Boy.
I don't like as the misnames that we like Barack we did last week.
Yes, but here's why.
Barnacle Boy.
Because Barnabas and Barnacle Boy were both the helpers.
Okay. Wow.
Did you just press pause to tell us that?
No.
This is on the
We're
show.
rolling.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
There you go.
Because I was going to say we need to go back and record that. I'm glad you didn't press.
And it's not being edited out.
No.
Yeah. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
Barnabas Squarebarts. Okay. Anyway.
The things you encounter on the Story Fulfilled podcast.
Gosh.
So
we just lost a bunch of listeners, though. They're like, what are these people doing?
We have a question. Barnabas wrote another book telling of Jesus, and it is known as the Gospel of Barnabas. You will not find it in your Bible.
No.
It did not make it into the canon, so we don't know,
Possible, but like probably not written by Barnabas is what it's been.
And may or may not have some helpful stuff in there, but the compilers of the canon felt that it did not contribute to the story. They kind of did what we're doing now, and how does this contribute to the overall story? And they decided that this didn't. So brings up the question, is there somebody else in the Bible whose perspective you wish made it into the Bible?
So like somebody you wish wrote a book and it was in there.
Yeah, any character from the Bible.
All right.
Yeah.
There are so many.
There's a lot of people in there.
Yeah. There's a lot that it'd be interesting to.
A lot of episodes of the podcast then.
That it would definitely add to the podcast.
All right. Ooh, who wants to go first then?
Okay, I think I can go first. I think I would like to hear one or all of David's wives.
Oh boy.
I think that would
Wow.
be super interesting because we hear a lot about David, but what about from the other perspective? I don't know. I think that'd be funny.
Yeah.
The other one that would be really interesting, which C.S. Lewis kind of did, but would be like the devil to hear what he would.
Right.
The rest of the story.
I guess you're referring to Screw Tape
Letters. Yeah.
So a senior
devil,
but not
the
the devil. So
or
to
like
speak.
Paradise Lost.
I was gonna say
Milton,
like
right?
Paradise Lost kind of thing. Yeah.
But yeah.
The devil is your answer.
Or David's wives.
David's wives,
Okay,
like Abigail.
We'll pray
like
for
Abigail. And Bathsheba. Okay. I think Bathsheba would be interesting. All right, who's next?
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking that I would go with Balaam's donkey, but I won't because he's already been.
He's been your answer for a couple questions, I'm sure.
That's pretty good.
So I think I would like to hear from Melchizedek.
Ooh.
Okay.
Because he appears out of nowhere as a priest. And so the question is, a priest of what? How did he become a priest? What is that all about? And then Jesus is referred to as a priest in the order of Melchizedek, who has no previous priesthood lineage or whatever. And so I'm like, yeah, I'd like to hear about his journey toward priesthood and even his encounter with Abraham and what he thought
what his side of the story is.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Hey, Fletcher.
Now you put me on the spot. I've been thinking and I haven't thought of anything yet. Who would I want? I find the whole time period really interesting, but the in between the Old Testament and the intertestamental period,
Right.
from 400 BC to kind of 0 AD, something about the hammer. What's his name? Judah the Hammer.
Oh, right.
From the Maccabees. I want to see what he was doing at that time.
Right.
And his story is kind of the founding of Hanukkah. And we do have a book called the Maccabees, but I want it to be true. So, I want to see what actually happened as opposed to whatever written in the Maccabees. So
Yeah.
the Hammer, Judah Maccabee.
There we
There
go.
we go. So, as always, if you have any perspective that you would like to read about in the Bible that's not there, any person's perspective that didn't make it into the Bible, then we'd love to hear about that. You can let us know on our different social channels. And as always, we encourage you to read the stories for yourself to get the whole picture of what is going on. And today's story takes place in the book of Acts. So
Like the tool that you chop with?
no.
LOL.
And that's why I
Fletcher.
purposely pronounced every letter in the
Acatus.
word of Acts. So,
Yeah.
and there's nothing, yes.
But
So
not just Acts.
it is not,
Not just Acts. 1 Corinthians and Galatians as well.
yes.
He's mentioned, yeah, for sure.
Yes. We pick up the story of Barnabas in the book of Acts. And so today it is a big jump from where
From last week.
we were, right?
Absolutely.
And so 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the rebuilding of Jerusalem and how that was really the last thing that happened in the Old Testament. And today we're talking about something obviously in the New Testament. And the biggest thing at this point in history that has happened is the Messiah has come.
Yay! I think we clap every time we say that, but I mean,
Do we?
that's
Okay.
sure.
There we go.
That's something we can start.
Not only has he come, he's lived, he's died, he is resurrected, which is, that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this podcast, right? So a little while later, a man named Saul met with Jesus while he was traveling. And he was, from that point forward, he was known as Paul. Often we talk about his name being changed, but his name actually wasn't changed. He was still Saul of Tarsus, but he was referred to as Paul. And that was more of
Was
a
it like the
Roman-
Greek name? Yeah, the Roman Greek
yeah,
name.
because
Cool.
he was a Roman citizen as well. And he became an apostle of Jesus, and that is an incredible encounter.
So, going to history, you might have heard Jay say something about Jesus being born around 6 to 4 BC. And you're like, wait a minute. BC, the calendar starts at 0. Isn't Jesus born at the beginning of the calendar? Well, originally they thought that's when Jesus was born, so they made the calendar in that way. Turns out the dates were a little bit wrong. So he's probably born around 4 BC. So that's why we said that.
Yeah.
Anyway, today's story starts around 44 AD after Anno Domini.
The year of
the year of the Lord. The Roman Empire controls basically the entire world. They control the whole Mediterranean region all the way to Western Europe up into Britain. So if you remember to last episode, we talked about how the Persian Empire was the ones that controlled the whole world. And you think, okay, what happened? It's been 400 years. Let's talk about it. So in 336 to 332, there's a man named Alexander the Great, and he was considered one of the greatest warriors, generals of ancient history. And
Didn't he give himself that name too, the Great?
Maybe.
I think
I
that'd
think
be,
so. I think I heard that somewhere too.
That's great. That's great.
I am great.
Well, he did some pretty crazy things. He basically conquered the entire Persian Empire. He conquered from the Greek islands down to Egypt, through the entire Middle East, over as far as the eastern side of the Persian Empire in India. And he did this in like 4 years.
That's a great accomplishment.
Yeah, he conquered.
He earned
that name.
Self-proclaimed nickname.
Conquered cities, destroyed them, and absolutely demolished the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
So after the death of Alexander the Great, Greece started to weaken. Like there was nobody great after Alexander. They started to weaken.
How do you live up to that?
Exactly. It's hard to. So the Greek Empire was split into 4 different sections, and eventually the Greeks were definitively defeated at the Battle of Corinth in 146 BC.
Yeah.
And so from now on, the Romans are kind of the superpower of
Right.
the world, the
Right.
region.
So in the show notes, we're going to include a map of the Roman Empire, as well as a map of Paul's first missionary journey. So you can check that out there. It's hard to follow unless you really know your Greek and Roman cities, but they start, like Paul's first missionary journey starts in Antioch, which is near Syria. Then they go to Seleucia, Salome, Paphos, Perga, Antioch, and Pisidia.
Yeah, 2 different Antiochs. That gets you,
Yes.
eh?
Right.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
And because there was a king named Antiochus, and you want to name the city after the king.
Yeah.
So there's like a bunch of different cities named Antioch, and you gotta figure out which
Yeah.
one is which.
They also continue to Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, and Italia. So it's all kind of in the same area. But again, check the show notes for that. Note it's all along the Mediterranean Sea in there.
As you read through Acts, you get all of those missionary journeys.
Mhm.
And then what's neat is if you're paying attention, you see where each of the letters, the later epistles that he writes, where they come from and,
Yeah.
and what they have to
Yeah.
do it with. And so, Acts and the epistles together, really good reading companions.
Yeah, so even if you look at, we talked about how Barnabas is in Corinthians and Galatians. So Corinth was in Greece, and then Galatia was up further in modern-day Turkey.
Yeah, that's
So-
really cool seeing like the letters, and then you saw when Paul actually did his missionary journeys.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about
No, we're
Paul
not talking
today.
about
We
Paul.
can't talk about him too much, or we'll think the episode's about him. We're talking about Barnabas
Yeah.
or Joseph. He's actually one of the earliest apostles of Jesus, other than like the 12 disciples.
Yeah.
He's the 11 disciples. Barnabas was a Levite Jew from Cyprus, and he lived and he went to school in Jerusalem. And after Pentecost and all these Christians were getting together, a bunch of people were selling all they had and giving the money to the church. And Barnabas was actually one of them. He sold his field,
Right.
sold his property, and then laid the money at the feet of the disciples for their ministry. After Paul's conversion, we hear about him returning to Jerusalem to start preaching the gospel. And the Christians were afraid because he was used to be killing Christians
Right.
and persecuting them. And they're like, wait a minute, this is Paul. We don't want to affiliate with him. Maybe he's trying to trick
Yeah.
us.
He stood over when Stephen was stoned. He stood there and approved of what was going on.
He's not somebody you want to affiliate with if you're a Christian
Right.
in Jerusalem at the time.
Yep.
But Barnabas ends up coming up and vouching for Paul, saying, no, Paul has met Jesus and he has been changed and he is now a disciple of the Lord, and
Right.
he's going to preach to them truly. So Barnabas brings them to the apostles and introduces them to Paul.
Yep.
He's the gateway drug.
What? Can you explain that? I want to know what you mean.
I don't know if we do.
All right, we'll leave it at that then. He's the gateway. Anyway,
He's
a gateway drug.
Just gateway.
Okay. I tried to clean it up, but oh well. In around 43, 44 AD, I said AD this time.
There
It's
we go.
correct. Barnabas was sent to Antioch to preach and teach there. He actually found the work really difficult, so he went and got his friend Paul and said, look, this is tough. You want to come with me to teach in Antioch? And together they taught and preached all through Antioch for an entire year. Eventually they returned to Jerusalem to support the people in Judea, to work with them there. And then again, they went back to Antioch with a guy named John Mark, who was Barnabas's cousin.
Yeah.
And John Mark might have been the author of the book of Mark, which was
Right.
pretty cool. We're not 100% sure because there's probably lots of Marks, but John Mark is assumed to be the author of
Right.
the book of the Gospel of Mark. So they end up departing on their first missionary journey. And again, we have the map in the show notes of where exactly they went. You can read Acts chapter 14. They did a bunch of stuff there. They preached, they taught. They were actually thrown out of Antioch at one point. Paul was stoned to death and then got back up.
Wait,
Not quite to death.
not to death, yeah.
Well, no, it's if you read chapter 14, man, it says
They left him for dead.
They just left
they
him
dragged
for
his
dead.
dead body and then he popped up.
Right.
Anyway, they were stoned. At one point, they did a miracle. They healed a man, and they started trying to sacrifice things like gods.
Yeah.
They were worshiping them like Greek gods. After their missionary journey, again, the missionary journey, read chapter 14 of Acts. It's fantastic. They go through all sorts of stuff. Later on, Barnabas is involved with a discussion with Paul. It's against the Jewish Christians because they were saying that, Gentiles needed to be circumcised to be saved. Mm-hmm. And Paul and Barnabas disagreed with this. They found a resolution and ended up agreeing that no, Gentiles do not have to be circumcised. This went along with a bunch of other Jewish traditions, but that was their big one. What we didn't mention about the first missionary journey is that John Mark came along with them, and in the middle of it, he just left and abandoned them. It really bothered Paul that John Mark left in the middle of his journey, so he didn't really want to work with John Mark again, and Barnabas wanted to give John Mark a second chance. So
a little bit of a grudge.
Yeah, he maybe, but he's doing some difficult work, and you don't want somebody leaving you in the middle of it. So on their next missionary journey, Paul invites Barnabas, and Barnabas wants to bring John Mark along. Paul won't allow it. So they end up not going on the missionary journey, and we don't know exactly what Barnabas did afterward, but we do know he continued to be an apostle and to go out and teach.
This is where the names come in, like the son of encouragement, right?
Yeah.
So he sees the best in John Mark, and I mean maybe because they're related, you could probably potentially make that argument, but he fought to include him and to keep him and to see the good in him and to the redeemable qualities, and so you see his name actually coming into play.
And later on, actually, Paul asked for John Mark by name. And we know that Barnabas was mentoring John Mark, and then as the years went on, Paul actually respected John Mark enough to invite him out later on, and we probably think it's that because of Barnabas's work with him and encouragement and discipleship. At the end of his life, Barnabas is said to have been martyred in Cyprus, but we don't actually know for sure, but that's where he's from. He martyred him in Cyprus. And that's the end of the story of Barnabas.
Yeah.
There we go. So I guess that leads us to our final question.
Doesn't ever.
Usually does.
So how does the story of Barnabas lead to fulfilling the rest of the story of God throughout the Bible?
Yeah, so one observation that I have here is, this season is about helpers, and we often see Barnabas as the helper because of the role that he plays in Paul's life, but it didn't actually start that way, right? Mm-hmm. Barnabas was actually sent to do the preaching, and he found it to be difficult, and he brought along Paul to kind of get his feet wet in preaching, and also as a help to him because he found the work to be very difficult.
Well, he also vouched for Paul.
And he vouched for Paul.
It wasn't like he was the one that kind of let him in. He was the gateway drug, right? into Christianity. Yeah. So and into that circle. And
so I think, and then what we see happen, it's not spoken about explicitly in the text, but what we do see happen is that Barnabas recognizes Paul's contribution to the mission and allows him obviously to take the lead and to become a voice in the kingdom, a voice to the Gentiles, and to promote and bring forth the gospel really to the whole world. And so, it's interesting that he starts out kind of as the main character, but he shifts his perspective in recognizing the gifting of Paul and just how he's more suited to what's been laid before them. And he then helps Paul in his ministry and in his mission. And obviously we see, like, if he was discipling John Mark, then he obviously had a ministry of his own that he continued in as well. But we just see this kind of, I wouldn't say slinking back, but like just allowing.
Yeah. That I really like that, allowing the other person to, so you really think of the role of a discipler, like of a
mentor.
The opposite of a disciple, I guess. Of the mentor is to let your disciple grow and grow in the ways that they're meant to go. So with Paul, I'm sure there was some sort of either mentorship, discipleship, and then he grew, and then Paul became what he was meant to. And then we see that with John Mark, he became a better person. And that is such an important thing, is the idea of discipleship and not getting in their way because you think they're going to be better than you, or you know what I mean? Yeah. I think that's a cool aspect of it that we don't always look at, is get out of the way if you see the potential of somebody
Right.
and you're
And
discipling
had
them.
Barnabas not realized his need for help, we would not have 2/3 of the New Testament.
Yeah. Or if he tried to, Paul, this is my territory, don't get in. Yeah, that would have been.
Hey, I'm going to bring you along, but just keep your mouth shut, okay?
No. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would say that, the Bible that we have and the testimony of the testimony of Christ throughout the world is in large part because of Barnabas's encouraging and coming alongside of Paul.
Absolutely.
Love that. Well, thanks, guys. Good answer.
Yeah. I think that's it, though, isn't
I
it?
think that's all we have for today.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye for now.